we are doing something a little different today. Usually we're looking forward at tech trends, market shifts, the future of work.
Right. What's next?
Exactly. But today, we're looking backward. We're taking a stack of documents, mainly the definitive biography by David Nasaw, which is just called Andrew Carnegie, and we're going to try and deconstruct a man whose name is, literally carved into the stone of American history.
It's a name that carries so much weight. Libraries, concert halls.
It really does. I think if you stopped the average person on the street today and asked who was Andrew Carnegie, you'd get a very specific, very curated image. You get the short, white-bearded, sort of benevolent grandfather figure, the man who built the library.
The patron saint of reading.
Yeah.
The author of The Gospel of Wealth.
Precisely. The man who famously said, "The man who dies rich dies disgraced." But the source material we have today suggests that this image is, well, let's call it a mask. A very, very carefully constructed mask that Carnegie spent his entire life polishing.
That's the crucial starting point, isn't it? You have to remember that Andrew Carnegie wrote his own autobiography. He was the editor-in-chief of his own life story.
Right, he got to set the narrative.
He knew exactly how he wanted to be remembered. But when David Nasaw went into the archives, and we're talking about private letters, business ledgers, diaries that Carnegie likely didn't intend for the public to see, at least not alongside his memoirs, he found a massive discrepancy.
A discrepancy between the myth and the man.
A huge one. The myth is the classic Horatio Alger story. The poor immigrant boy who works harder than anyone else, pulls himself up by his bootstraps, and succeeds through sheer grit and virtue.
And look, to be fair, the hard work was there. We can't deny that.
Oh, absolutely. The work ethic was insane. But the documents reveal that it wasn't just hard work. It was insider trading. It was cronyism. It was a level of ruthless pragmatism that, frankly, borders on the sociopathic at times.
And what I found so compelling in reading through this research is the central paradox Nasaw highlights. We tend to think of robber barons and philanthropists as two different phases of life,
Yeah, like first you make the money, then you give it away.
Exactly. Or maybe they're just two different types of people. But with Carnegie, they're completely intertwined.
They feed each other. That's the core tension. Carnegie desperately wanted to be a good person. He wanted to be a man of letters, a radical thinker, a hero to the working man.
You wanted the respect.
He craved it. But to be the great philanthropist he envisioned, to have the power to reshape the world with his money, he needed a massive surplus of capital. And to get that surplus, he had to become a brutal capitalist. He had to squeeze wages, crush unions, and rig markets.
So he had to become a robber baron so that he could afford to be a saint.
That's the paradox. It's this deep psychological split that drives the whole story. And today we're going to try and peel back that first layer. We're going to look at the first 30 years of his life, from the weaving cottage in Scotland to the end of the Civil War. This is the origin story.
And it's a gritty one.
It really is.
Let's start with the visual, because I think it helps ground the reality. When we picture Carnegie, we picture the statues, this imposing figure. But physically, what are we dealing with?
We are dealing with a very small man. We're talking about 5'3", maybe even 5'2", on a bad day.
Really? That's short.
Oh, yeah. And he was incredibly insecure about it. The records show he wore boots with specially lifted heels. He wore these extra tall silk top hats to add inches.
He was trying to hack his height?
Constantly. He was always posing for photos in very specific ways, sitting down while others stood, or standing on a step, anything to obscure his height. He was a man literally trying to construct a silhouette that was larger than his biological reality.
Which, if we're being literary about it, is a perfect metaphor for his entire career.
It is. It absolutely is.
So let's go back to the source code. Dunfermline, Scotland, 1835. This isn't a castle he's born into.
Far, far from it. This is a tiny gray stone weaver's cottage. And you have to understand the sensory environment of this place. The ground floor of this cottage wasn't a living room or a parlor.
What was it?
It was a factory floor. It was dominated by the loom.
This is the hand loom era, right?
Right.
Before the giant factories took over.
Right. His father, Will Carnegie, was a damask weaver. So he sat at this massive wooden machine all day, throwing the shuttle back and forth. The noise would have been constant clack, 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 the thud of the beam.
I can't even imagine.
And the smell, flax, oil, sweat. The family, Will, his mother Margaret, and little Andrew, lived in the attic above the loom.
The attic?
One room. They ate, slept, and lived their entire lives in the space directly above the machinery.
So literally no separation between life and labor.
None. Zero. And that's vital to understand because Andrew's childhood is defined by the collapse of that labor. But before we get to the collapse, we have to look at his inheritance. And I don't mean money, because they had absolutely none. I mean the ideological DNA he inherits from his two grandfathers. This is really where his personality comes from.
I loved this part of the biography. It's like a genetic tug of war between two very different worldviews. On one side, you have the Carnegies, the father side.
The Daft Andrew line. His grandfather, Andrew Carnegie, was known locally as Daft Andrew or the Professor.
The professor.
But he wasn't a professor at a university. He was the professor of the College of Pattysmore.
Okay, that sounds prestigious.
It sounds great, until you realize the college was just the back room of the local pub.
Ah, I feel like every small town has a college like that.
Exactly. Daft Andrew was a character. He was sunny, optimistic, a dreamer. He loved to debate, he loved to drink, he loved to talk about the rights of man. But he wasn't a grinder. He wasn't aggressive about money.
So more of a thinker than a doer.
A total thinker. He prioritized the good life of the mind and social connection over the hard reality of the wallet. And young Andrew Carnegie definitely gets that charm. He gets that ability to hold a room, that relentless optimism.
But then you have the mother side, the Morrisons, and this is where the steel comes from.
The Morrisons were a different breed entirely. They were firebrands. His grandfather, Thomas Morrison, and his uncle Bailey Morrison were radical political agitators.
Okay, define radical for us in the context of 1830s Scotland. They weren't just complaining about tax rates, I assume.
No, they were Chartists.
Right, let's deep dive on Chartism for a second, because this term comes up constantly in his early letters. What exactly did a Chartist want? What were they screaming about on the street corners?
The Chartists were a massive working-class movement that demanded something called the People's Charter. And what that meant, effectively, was they wanted to turn Britain into a republic. Yeah. They wanted universal male suffrage. One man, one vote, regardless of how much property you owned. At the time, if you didn't own land, you didn't vote. Simple as that.
So a total upheaval of the system.
A complete one. They wanted to abolish the House of Lords. They wanted to dismantle the privileges of the aristocracy and the Church of England.
So they were virulently anti-elite.
Completely. They viewed the aristocracy as parasites, leeches on society. They believed that land and wealth should not be inherited. They should be earned. They believed that the man who works is the only one who has value.
And young Andrew is soaking all of this in.
He's sitting on his uncle's shoulders at these massive outdoor rallies, listening to thousands of weavers chant about the evils of hereditary privilege and the luxury of the aristocracy.
Which is just dripping with irony. The man who becomes the richest man in the world, the ultimate capitalist, is raised on a diet of eat the rich.
It is deeply ironic, but it's also the key to his psychology. Carnegie never saw himself as an aristocrat, even later when he lived in a literal castle in Scotland.
How did he square that circle?
In his mind, he saw himself as a captain of industry. He thought the Chartists were right. Hereditary wealth is bad, but earned wealth, that's noble. He twisted the Chartist logic to justify his own massive accumulation. He told himself he was the hero of the Chartist story because he earned it, unlike the dukes and earls he despised.
A convenient bit of mental gymnastics.
Very.
But before he can earn anything, the world falls apart. We have to talk about the industrial disruption. Dunfermline was a linen town. That was its entire identity.
It was famous for it, fine damask linen. But history was marching on. The steam engine arrived, the factory system arrived. And suddenly, a handloom weaver like Will Carnegie was obsolete.
It's the classic story of automation.
It is. You have a skilled artisan who takes immense pride in his work, suddenly competing with a machine that can do it faster, cheaper, and in higher volume.
The biography describes the father, Will, as a decent chap who just couldn't process this change. It wasn't that he was lazy, it was that he was just stubborn.
Will Carnegie broke. That's the only way to describe it. He refused to adapt. He kept weaving high-quality cloth that nobody wanted to pay for. There's a scene Nassau describes where Will weaves a beautiful piece of cloth, puts it in a bag, and walks to the merchant in town.
And the merchant says,
"I don't need it," or offers him a price that wouldn't even cover the cost of the thread. It was humiliating.
And Andrew sees all of this.
He sees his father unmanned. He hears his father come home, sit in the silence of the cottage, and say, "I have no more work." For a young boy, seeing your father, the protector, the provider, reduced to helplessness by economic forces, that is a trauma event.
It explains the fear that chases him later.
It explains the terror. Andrew Carnegie spent his entire life running away from that moment in the cottage. He subconsciously lost respect for his father. He decided, I will never be that vulnerable. I will never be at the mercy of the market. I will be the market.
And into that vacuum steps the mother, Margaret, Meg.
Meg is the spine of the family. She is the terrifyingly strong matriarch. When Will gives up and sinks into depression, she starts binding shoes to make money. She opens a sweetie shop in the front room, selling potted meat and cabbages to neighbors. She is the one who looks at their starving family and makes the executive decision.
She's the one who says, "We're leaving."
She says, "We are leaving. We are going to America."
There is a quote from her that I wrote down: "Make a spoon or spoil a horn."
It's a fantastic old Scottish expression. It comes from carving spoons out of horn. It basically means go for broke, risk everything. We're either going to make it big or we're going to ruin it completely, but we are not staying here to slowly die of hunger.
Wow. There's one detail in the Dunfermline section that really caught me off guard. The sister. I've read about Carnegie before, I've been to the libraries, and I never knew he had a sister.
Most people don't. Her name was Anne. She died in childhood.
Which was sadly common back then.
It was. That's not the shocking part. The shocking part is that Andrew Carnegie erased her. In his autobiography, she does not exist. He writes as if he was always an only child until his brother Tom was born later.
Why would he do that? What's the psychology there?
It tells us everything about his coping mechanism. Carnegie was an aggressive optimist. He refused to acknowledge pain, failure, or tragedy. If something didn't fit his narrative of sunny progress, he simply deleted it.
Wow.
He couldn't handle the memory of her death or perhaps the memory of his mother's grief, so he edited her out of history. It shows a certain ruthlessness with the truth when it comes to his own emotional comfort.
So the decision is made, America. The year is 1848. Andrew is 12 years old. They have to borrow 20 pounds just to buy the tickets. And they get on a ship called the Westcasset.
And this was not a cruise. The Westcasset was a converted whaler.
Okay, explain that for the listener. What does it mean to travel on a converted whaler?
It means the ship was designed to haul dead whales and blubber, not human beings. It had been hastily refitted to carry immigrants in the cargo hold to make money on the return trip from Europe.
So the wood.
The wood was soaked in years of rancid whale oil. The smell would have been overpowering, a mix of old blubber, vomit, unwashed bodies, and bilge water. Just imagine.
And they are down there for 42 days.
42 days in the dark. Ventilation was non-existent. Disease was rampant. His mother and father were violently seasick the entire time. The family was miserable.
But not Andrew.
But Anne, here's the quintessential Andrew Carnegie detail. Andrew loved it.
Of course he
He
did.
was 12 years old and had the run of the ship. While his parents were groaning in the dark hold, he was up on deck learning to tie knots with the sailors. He was charming the cook to get extra biscuits. He treated it like a grand adventure.
It shows his resilience, sure, but also something else.
A slight detachment, maybe. A detachment from the suffering of those around him. He could be having the time of his life while his parents were in agony just a few feet away.
So they survive a crossing. They navigate the Erie Canal, they take steamboats down the rivers, and they finally arrive in Allegheny City, which is the Twin City, to Pittsburgh. And if they were expecting the rolling green hills of the New World.
They were in for a rude awakening.
Hmm.
You have to picture Pittsburgh in 1848. It was the industrial forge of the continent. Anthony Trollope visited around this time and called it the blackest place he had ever seen.
Literally black.
Literally.
Okay.
They burned soft bituminous coal for everything. Homes, factories, steamboats. The smoke was thick, heavy, and oily. It coated everything.
So a white shirt would be gray in minutes.
In 20 minutes, yeah. The sun was often blocked out at noon. And the ground. There was no pavement. It was mud, horse manure, and garbage.
And the livestock, the famous pigs.
Right, there was no sanitation department.
Yeah.
So the city relied on pigs. Actual hogs roamed the streets freely, eating the garbage. That was the waste management system. It was a slum.
The Carnegies move into a back alley cottage owned by a relative. They are living rent-free because they're destitute. And the father, Will, tries to weave again.
He tries. He sets up a loom. He weaves tablecloths. But the same dynamic that crushed him in Scotland follows him to America. He has to peddle them door to door. It's humiliating.
And he fails again.
He fails again. Eventually, he just stops. He becomes a spectral figure in the house, just sitting by the fire, defeated. Nassau points out that Carnegie actually misstated his father's death in his memoirs. He moved it up by a few years.
To write him out of the story sooner.
Exactly. Once the father ceased to be a provider, he ceased to be relevant to Andrew's narrative of ascent. It's cold, but it's practical. The father was a reminder of failure, so the memory was suppressed.
So the burden falls on the boy. Andrew is 13. He needs a job. And he enters the industrial machine.
His first job is as a bobbin boy in a cotton factory for $1.20 a week.
$1.20 For what kind of hours?
12 hours a day, 6 days a week. His job is to run around the looms, changing the bobbins of thread. It is loud, dangerous, and mind-numbingly boring. He hated it. He later said he would wake up in the night, terrified he had made a mistake on the loom.
But then he moves to a job that is even worse, the bobbin turning shop.
This is the absolute nadir. He is hired by a Scotsman named John Hay. His job is to tend a small steam engine and dip wooden bobbins into a vat of oil.
The oil bath.
The smell of the hot oil combined with the heat of the engine. It made him constantly nauseous. He was vomiting. He was coming home smelling of industrial grease that wouldn't wash off, but he kept doing it.
Why? Why not quit?
Because the alternative was starvation. He had seen his father fail. He was terrified of poverty. He wrote later that poverty is a wolf that must be driven from the door. He was willing to endure physical torture to keep that wolf away.
But he's not just enduring, he's looking for an exit. And the exit appears in the form of a new technology, the telegraph.
This is the turning point. This is the moment where the Andrew Carnegie we know is born.
Set the scene for us. The year is 1850. The telegraph is, what? The internet of its day.
It's the internet, the smartphone, and the Bloomberg terminal, all rolled into one. It is the first time in human history that information can travel faster than a horse. If you worked in a telegraph office, you were at the cutting edge of high tech. You are at the nerve center of global commerce.
And he gets a job as a messenger boy.
$2.50 a week. It was a huge raise. But the money didn't matter. The environment mattered. He was out of the factory. He was wearing a clean uniform. He was on the street.
And this is where we see the hustle. We talk about hustle culture today like it's a new thing, but Carnegie really invented it.
He absolutely did. He realized that as a messenger boy, his value was speed and reliability. So before he even started delivering messages, he memorized the street map of Pittsburgh. Every alley, every business, every shortcut.
But he went further. He memorized the faces of the businessmen.
Yeah, which is brilliant.
Why the faces?
So that if he saw Mr. Smith walking down the street, he could intercept him and say, "Mr. Smith, I have a telegram for you." It saved the businessman a trip back to the office. It made Carnegie look like a magician. He was making himself indispensable and memorable.
There is a story about a lost bank draft that illustrates his PR savvy even as a kid.
Oh, this is great. He found a bank draft, basically a check for $500 on the street.
Which was a fortune.
A year's wages for a working man. He turned it in. But he didn't just turn it in quietly. He made sure the press knew about it. The newspaper ran a story about the honest little fellow who returned the money. He was 14, and he was already managing his personal brand in the media.
Incredible. But he didn't want to steal a messenger. He wanted to be an operator, and this requires a very specific technical skill.
Right. So in those days, the telegraph receiver would punch dots and dashes onto a paper tape. The operator would then read the tape and translate it into English. It was a slow process.
Okay.
Carnegie noticed that the machine made a different sound for a dot than for a dash, a different kind of click.
So he learned to read by ear.
He hacked the system. He taught himself to transcribe the message just by listening to the rhythm of the clicks. He didn't need the paper tape. This allowed him to take messages almost as fast as they were being sent.
It was a superpower.
It was. It made him one of the most skilled operators in the city, despite being a teenager.
And while he's doing this, he's handling something called the steamer news.
This is crucial for his network. When ships arrived in Halifax from Europe, they carried the latest prices, political news, and market data. This was then telegraphed to Pittsburgh for the newspapers. Carnegie volunteered to be the one to copy this news down.
Because it meant he got the information first.
Exactly. And it put him in direct contact with the newspaper editors and the top merchants who would hang around the office waiting for the scoop. He was positioning himself as the gatekeeper of information. He was the node that everything passed through.
During this time, we also see the seeds of the library philanthropists, the Colonel Anderson controversy.
Yeah, this is fascinating. Colonel James Anderson was a local wealthy man who opened his private library to working boys on Saturdays. And Carnegie just devoured these books. History, science, literature. It was his university.
But then the library board tried to institute a subscription fee.
Right, a fee that Carnegie, the poor messenger boy, couldn't afford.
Or just refused to pay on principle.
I think that's it. He wrote a letter to the editor of the Pittsburgh Dispatch. He signed it, a working boy. He argued that the library was established to be free and that charging a fee violated the donor's intent.
He shamed them publicly.
He launched a media campaign, and they folded. They kept the library free. It's a perfect example of his personality. He believes in self-improvement through books, but he also believes in fighting publicly and aggressively to get what he wants. He wasn't afraid to punch up.
We also have these letters to his cousin Dodd back in Scotland, and these are fascinating because they show his political evolution. He's changing.
He is. Dodd was a hardcore Scottish radical. He hated the British monarchy, but he also hated the United States because of slavery. He called America the monster iniquity.
A pretty strong term. And how did Carnegie respond?
Vehemently. Carnegie hated slavery. He was an abolitionist in principle. But he argued that the American system of meritocracy outweighed its flaws.
The American dream.
He was all in on it. He told Dodd that in Britain, a poor boy stayed poor. In America, a poor boy could become a king. He was drinking the Kool-Aid. He needed to believe that the system was just because he was starting to succeed in it. He was transitioning from a Scottish radical to an American Republican.
And succeed he does, because he meets the man who will become his mentor, his boss, and I think you could say his corruptor, Thomas A. Scott.
Tom Scott, the superintendent of the Pennsylvania Railroad.
We need to explain the scale of the PRR. This wasn't just some local train line.
No. The Pennsylvania Railroad was the Standard Oil, the Google, the Amazon of the 1850s. It was the largest corporation in the world. It was the absolute backbone of American commerce. And Tom Scott was its rising star.
And Scott hires Carnegie.
He needed a personal telegrapher and secretary. He had seen Carnegie's hustle around the city. He offered him $35 a month.
A massive jump from $250 a week.
It was a fortune to Andrew, but the money was secondary. Being Tom Scott's secretary meant Carnegie was sitting in the room where it happened. He learned how to manage a complex, multi-state organization. He learned cost accounting, how to track the price of every wheel and every ton of coal.
Which is the secret sauce of Carnegie Steel later on.
It is. Most businessmen guessed. Carnegie calculated.
He also learned how to manage men. And we see a flash of the authoritarian here, the court-martial incident.
Right. Scott went out of town and left Andrew, still a teenager, in charge. There was a minor accident. A ballast train derailed due to crew negligence. Carnegie didn't just write a report.
What did he do?
He held an on-the-spot court-martial. He acted like a military general. He fired the guy responsible and suspended 2 others.
Did he even have the authority to do that?
Probably not.
Yeah.
But he took it. He later admitted he was a harsh boss. He said, "I never knew what it was to be tired." And he expected everyone else to be the same. He had zero empathy for workers who weren't as driven as he was. He was becoming management.
Okay, now we arrive at the moment where the history books usually say, and then Andrew invested wisely. This is the first investment, and this is where we really need to deconstruct the myth.
The myth. Andrew saved his pennies, spotted a good company called Adams Express, and bought stock. The reality. It was a rigged deal from start to finish.
Okay, walk us through the mechanics of this.
Tom Scott takes Andrew aside. He says, "There are 10 shares of Adams Express stock available for $500. You should buy them."
And why Adams Express?
Because Adams Express was a shipping company that used the railroad. And Scott knew that the Pennsylvania Railroad was about to give Adams Express an exclusive contract that would skyrocket the stock price.
Because Scott was the one writing the contract.
Exactly. It was pure insider trading.
Yeah.
But here's the kicker. Andrew didn't have $500.
So he couldn't buy it. End of story.
He couldn't. So Tom Scott lent him the money.
Wait. The boss, who is rigging the contract, lends his employee the money to buy the stock that is guaranteed to go up.
Yes. It was a gift. It was a way of bringing Andrew into the inner circle of corruption. Andrew's mother, Mag, mortgaged their house to pay Scott back eventually, but the initial capital was essentially handed to him on a platter.
Unbelievable. And then the check arrives.
The first dividend check, $10. Andrew stared at it. He wrote in his journal, Eureka. He said, "Here's the goose that lays the golden eggs."
What was the realization there? What clicked for him?
He realized that he had made money without working. He hadn't lifted a finger. The money had worked for him. That was the moment he stopped being a worker and started being a capitalist.
If that deal was gray, the next one is pitch black. The Woodruff sleeping car.
This is the smoking gun of crony capitalism. The story Carnegie told later was that he met T.T. Woodruff, the inventor of the sleeping car, by chance on a train.
Just a happy accident.
A happy accident. Woodruff showed him a model. Carnegie, the genius visionary, saw the potential and connected him with Scott. A nice fairy tale.
What was the reality?
The reality is much grittier. Scott and the president of the railroad, J. Edgar Thompson, wanted sleeping cars on the PRR, but they wanted a personal cut of the profits. They couldn't just invest in Woodruff's company openly because it was a massive conflict of interest. They were the ones awarding the contract.
So they needed a front man, a cutout.
They needed a bagman,
Hmm.
a straw man, and that was Andrew. They forced Woodruff to give a percentage of the company to them as the price for getting the contract, but they put the shares in Andrew Carnegie's name.
So Andrew held the stock for his bosses.
He held it. He secured a bank loan to pay for the buy-in, a loan that Scott helped him get, of course, and then he distributed the dividends to Scott and Thompson under the table, keeping a slice for himself.
That is straight up racketeering.
Today, they would all go to prison. In the 1850s, it was just business. But it completely destroys the idea that Carnegie was a lone genius. He was a tool used by powerful men to enrich themselves, and he got rich by playing along.
So Andrew is in his mid-20s. He's making serious money from these, let's call them schemes. And then 1861, the Civil War.
The country breaks apart, and Carnegie is torn. He is a Republican, he is an abolitionist, he is, in his own words, all aflame for the flag.
And because of Tom Scott, he gets pulled right into the center of the war effort.
Right. Abraham Lincoln's new administration hires Tom Scott to run the military railroads and telegraphs. It was a critical job. And Scott brings Carnegie to Washington as his right-hand man.
What were they doing?
They had to rebuild tracks that Confederate sympathizers in Maryland had torn up. They had to get troops into Washington to protect the capital. It was chaos.
And Carnegie likes to tell the story of his war wound.
The wound.
Hey.
Yes. He was trying to free a telegraph wire that was pinned down under some tracks. It snapped back and gashed his cheek. It bled.
And he turned this into... what?
He later talked about this as if he had taken a bayonet at Gettysburg. He claimed he was one of the first to shed blood for the Union.
He really had a flair for the dramatic, a master of PR.
He wanted the glory of the soldier without the risk of death. He was creating his own mythology in real time.
But he did see actual war. He was at Bull Run.
He was. He was organizing the transport of the wounded after the battle. He saw the rout. He saw the panic of the Union Army. It was a total disaster.
And how did he react?
Typical Carnegie, he spun it. He wrote a letter to the press arguing that the defeat was a blessing in disguise because it would shake the North out of its complacency and make them take the war seriously. He could find the silver lining in a massacre.
But he doesn't stay in Washington.
No. After a few months, he leaves. He goes back to Pittsburgh. He never enlists. He never picks up a rifle.
Why not?
Well, his official argument was that his skills were better used running the railroad division in Pittsburgh, which was probably true. The railroad was vital to the Union victory.
But Nassau suggests there was another reason.
The real reason was opportunity cost. The war was creating an economic boom. Prices were skyrocketing. Fortunes were being made. Carnegie didn't want to be a bureaucrat in Washington. He wanted to be in Pittsburgh making deals.
And the biggest deal of the war era was oil.
Black gold. Oil was discovered in Titusville, Pennsylvania, not far from Pittsburgh. It was a mania. It was like the dot-com boom or the crypto boom. Everyone went crazy.
And Carnegie jumped in?
He and a group of friends pooled their money and bought the Story Farm on Oil Creek. They formed the Columbia Oil Company.
And the returns were?
Astronomical. In 1 year, the company paid out dividends equal to something like 400% of the initial investment. This is where Carnegie became truly wealthy. He wasn't just comfortable anymore. He was rich.
There's a hilarious and tragic story about the lake of oil that illustrates how chaotic this whole boom was.
Oh, it's great. They had so much oil coming out of the ground, they ran out of barrels to put it in. So Carnegie's brilliant idea was to dig a massive hole in the ground, a literal lake, and just fill it with oil. They figured they would store it there until prices rose.
I can see where this is going. This doesn't sound like a good idea.
It was an environmental disaster. The oil leaked into the soil. It evaporated into the air. When a storm came, the pit flooded and washed millions of gallons of crude oil into the creek.
So they lost it all?
They lost a huge amount. It showed that for all his genius, he was also just gambling. But the wells were so productive that even with that incredible waste, they still made a fortune.
So the war ends. Carnegie is 30 years old. He has money from oil, money from the railroad, but he's about to make his biggest move yet, the move into manufacturing. And it starts with bridges.
This is the bridge to the steel empire, literally. Carnegie looked at the railroads. He saw that the old wooden bridges were collapsing under the weight of the new heavy locomotives. He knew that every bridge in America would have to be replaced with iron.
So he starts a company, Piper and Schiffler.
To build iron bridges.
Yeah.
But he uses the old playbook, the one he learned from Tom Scott. He doesn't just go out and try to sell bridges on the open market.
What does he do?
He goes to his old bosses, Tom Scott and J. Edgar Thompson, and says, "I'm starting a bridge company. If you give me the contracts for the Pennsylvania Railroad, I will give you secret shares in my company."
It's the Woodruff sleeping car deal on steroids.
It's a closed loop. The railroad executives award the contract to the bridge company they secretly own. They pay inflated prices using the railroad's money, and then they pocket the profits as dividends from the bridge company. It's risk-free.
And Carnegie sits in the middle, managing the whole thing.
And using the railroad's telegraph lines to run his private business, using the railroad's influence to get cheaper iron. He had an insurmountable advantage over any competitor because the game was rigged in his favor. This is the model he uses for steel later: vertical integration and insider control.
This leads us to the end of our deep dive today. We leave Carnegie at age 30. He is no longer the bobbin boy. He's a tycoon in the making.
He is transformed completely. He has shed his father's passivity. He has shed the radical politics of his grandfather, at least in practice. He is fully integrated into the corrupt, booming machinery of American capitalism.
And the big question Nassau asks is, was he ashamed of any of this? The insider deals, the cronyism.
And the answer is a resounding no. That's what is so fascinating. Carnegie didn't see himself as a crook. He saw himself as a builder. He believed that by building bridges, railroads, and industries, he was advancing civilization. The profit, even the rigged profit, was just the scorecard of his contribution.
It really forces you to rethink the whole concept of the self-made man.
It destroys it. We love the myth of the lone wolf genius. But Carnegie was a product of a team of mentors who rigged the system for him, a mother who sacrificed everything, and a family network. If Andrew Carnegie had been a rugged individualist who refused to play the game, if he'd been like his father, he would have died poor.
So his genius wasn't just in business.
His genius was his flexibility, his ability to compromise his morals to fit the mold of the powerful men around him, to make himself useful to them.
And we haven't even touched the steel empire yet, the Homestead strike, the blood on his hands, or the thousands of libraries that eventually got built with this tainted money.
That is a massive story for another day. But you can't understand the Steel King without understanding the Bobbin Boy. That fear of poverty and the willingness to do anything to escape it, that is the engine that built the entire empire.
A complicated legacy for a complicated man. Thanks for listening to this deep dive.
See you next time.